So we're going to close out today with a little exploration of Scripture that is the final part of the sermon series that we're on called Place. And I knew that our time we'd be pushing the time, but I was okay with that. So this is actually going to be a two-part sermon. Part one is today. Part two will be tomorrow. So I'm just going to set this up. Not tomorrow. Yes, please don't come to hear part two tomorrow. I mean, you can come tomorrow, but I will not be here. But we've been looking at this idea that we are a church located in a place, and that place that we are located in matters. Who we are as a community of faith matters. Who you are as individuals in this community of faith matters. The giftings God has given you matters. The sermon series before that, we talked about your specific gifting that we need in this church. Apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. Those giftings that the Spirit has stirred up in your hearts, we need you to express those here so that we can be a full, flourishing church. Church was never supposed to be just about one person or one worship team. It was supposed to be about the body working together and loving each other and building each other up for the good of the broader community, the city in which it finds itself. And so we've been trying to explore what that looks like as we've looked at what pliability looks like in our city, with our traditions, with our practices, what it means to leverage the giftings God's given us for the problems and the challenges in our church, in our city, what it means to operate from a place of abundance and generosity and believe that God is overflowing with love and grace in us toward those around us. And then what it means to be a catalyst so that our life is like a ripple that affects those around us. And so this is what this has all been about. And now we're at the final piece to the puzzle, and that is the ecosystem that is First Baptist Church. That's what we're talking about. Whether you know it or not, you have come this morning to a very specific kind of ecosystem. And so we want to understand what that is and how we cultivate that appropriately and in a way that would honor and glorify Jesus and His kingdom. And so I asked my son. My son is in different camps of like, I grew up, I was basically all sports. Okay, I know you can tell with my huge frame and everything. It's obvious. Big athlete. But I played every sport, anytime, all day. I had a brother who was 2.5 years younger than me. We played one-on-one every sport imaginable. And so I had the opportunity to go into a space I'd never really been in before, and that's where the smart people hang out. And that's like a science fair. I never had that experience growing up. But my son, he also likes sports, but he also likes, things that work with the mind, which is great. We highly encourage it. But so he won a certain place in a certain competition, got to go to the science fair, the state science fair or whatever. And I'd never been in this experience. And I'm just like, ooh, this is like sports for smart people, And like instead of Nike bags and, they're like matching sweatsuits, they were like in suits and like kind of eclectic stuff, with their computer bags. And, these were kids who were competing on a different plane. And it was pretty cool because I was like, it's like stepping into a whole new world. And so since my son has this kind of way of thinking about things, I told him I was doing a sermon series on the ecosystem. And I was like, can you explain for me briefly what is an ecosystem, scientifically speaking, in like a minute or two? So he put a little video together. Let's see if he can help us with this. I think it's ready to go. There we go.
What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a type of geographic space where plants and animals and other living organisms interact with each other in a non-living environment. Ecosystems start with the primary producers. The primary producers are trees, plants, and flowers of the entire system. These give them the main life to the entire environment around them. Ecosystems cannot live without these primary producers. Next is your primary consumers. Primary consumers are what feed on the primary producers. Either your birds, squirrels, hares, or rabbits, or your hippos. Then you have secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are what feed on the primary consumers. Either your snakes, frogs, owls, so carnivores. Bats is the top predators, or the tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers are what feed on the secondary consumers. These are your wolves, bears, and hawks, mainly the king and queens of the entire ecosystem. Then, of course, this all takes place in the actual ecosystem itself. Whether that be a jungle, desert, ocean, really anything can be an ecosystem, as long as it has the components. Thank you for watching.
That was good. That was like 1 minute. So now that you know what it is, I don't have to explain it anymore. So I'm sure you got all that scientific information. So I'm going to set the sermon series up by kind of explaining the ecosystem. So he gave us kind of the big picture vision of what an ecosystem is in scientific kind of language. I want to bring it down for the rest of us a little bit so we can understand it. And then what we're going to do next week is understand how it works in a church community, because we are an ecosystem as well. So this is an analogy. Each one of these sermons, we've been trying to take one analogy or idea and kind of compare it. We use the lever idea, we've used the ripple idea, we've used the palm tree idea, all these different ideas that are kind of like images that we can link onto as we try to understand who we are and what we're doing here in Pittsfield in 2026, okay? So the word ecosystem is a word that has two pieces, right? Eco and system, okay? And so eco is a word that from the ancient Greek has to do with house or household. So eco is maybe an easy way to think about it is home. It's a place to live. And then system, obviously, is some kind of organized whole. So you have kind of an organized whole that is a home, that is a living place. And so this is a way of talking about a complex and diverse and interdependent relationship between living organisms and non-living organisms in a particular environment. So I have another slide here for you that is, this is from like a chemistry website that kind of makes it very simple. So you have this community of living things and in their non-living environment, and they're interacting together in a way that allows for flourishing. And so you have producers, as Silas was talking about, and consumers, and they kind of work together for the decomposition process that takes place. For example, you have fungi that are creating these nutrients, and then the grass takes that nutrients, and then the grasshopper eats the grass, right? And then what eats the grasshopper? Then something eats the grasshopper, let's say it's a frog, and then a snake eats the frog, and then the eagle eats the snake, and then the eagle ends up dying and decomposing, and the fungi takes that, and the cycle continues. And so there's this system that is happening, the ecosystem part of it is that living organism that is taking place in a specific location. And this is why this is such a powerful image for the church, because this is literally how we operate. One of my favorite, National Geographic describes an ecosystem with my favorite phrase that I've heard as I was kind of wrestling with this. They called it an interdependent living system or a bubble of life. And I love that. It's a bubble of life. And so this ecosystem is this community of organisms, and here I'm quoting from Melissa Murray, who's with the Australian Museum, in their physical environments interacting together. And so one of the key ideas here is the interaction that takes place in this bubble of life. Isn't that a great image? And you see where I'm going with this? I'm going to compare this bubble of life and interacting organisms to us, okay? Now, before we get there, I want you to think about, in the scriptures, all the garden imagery that is in the scriptures, okay? All the garden, organic kind of imagery. And I'm going to specifically focus on the place being a garden, because I think you can see in a garden. How many of you like gardening? Do we have any gardeners? Okay, so this is perfect for you, okay? So you understand this probably better than I do. I'm the guy who was like, I'm going to plant tomatoes, and I planted 12 massive plants, and I had like 3,000 tomatoes, that I never could eat. So I I'm not a real strategic gardener at this point. I just throw stuff places, okay? But I do understand a little bit how the ecosystem of a garden works. And so we're going to think about this garden imagery as we think about our church and how we engage and interact with each other. But before we do that, I want you to see that in the Bible, this isn't unusual. The Bible has garden imagery all throughout, from the beginning to the end. In fact, if we had time, I could just have you tell me where the garden imagery is. Since we don't have much time, I'm just going to mention to you real quickly where the garden imagery is throughout Scripture. The Bible opens up in Genesis 2 with garden imagery, right? Because paradise, the Garden of Eden, is a garden temple environment. And so the very beginning of the Bible begins in this garden, with this garden imagery. Psalm 1 is the opening, prayer book of the Bible, and it begins with a gardening kind of imagery. It talks about a tree being planted by living water that produces fruit in season. It's this image of a flourishing tree and water and an ecosystem that's working correctly and producing great fruit. The Song of Solomon, which is one of the wisdom literature books, uses garden imagery throughout, especially in chapter 4 and chapter 6, to describe love and flourishing in physical intimacy and affectional desire and mutual belonging. And to describe those things, it uses garden imagery. Isaiah 51, when God talks about the restoration He's going to bring for His people after they've been exiled to, out of their homeland, and He's like, I'm going to bring you back and I'm going to restore you. When He wants to talk about that, oftentimes He will use garden imagery. For the Lord comforts Zion. He comforts all her waste places and makes her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. So if God wants to say, I'm going to bring you back and restore you to the flourishing and splendor you once had, He's going to use garden terminology to describe it. Now we get to the New Testament. It's all over the New Testament too. Matthew chapter 7, Jesus talks about false teachers, and He says, you'll know them by their fruits. You'll know a bad tree or a bad plant by the bad fruit it produces. And so, Matthew 7, John 12, Jesus uses garden imagery to talk to people about the kingdom that He is announcing. He says, unless a grain of wheat falls in the ground and dies, it abides alone. But when it dies, it breaks open and it brings forth much fruit. This is all garden ecological terminology. John 15, you know this one. I am the vine, you are the branches. That's a pretty famous one, John 15. Again, garden terminology. There's some of the most famous parables that Jesus talks about have to do with garden terminology. I'm going to pass those right up because that would get me on a rabbit trail I do not want to go down. And then finally, in Gethsemane, Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross, and He's in an olive orchard. We have more garden imagery. And then Jesus raises from the grave in John 20, and where is He? Where is the grave located? Where do the women come to see the body of Jesus? Where is it? It's a garden. They in fact think that, they mistakenly think that the resurrected Jesus is the gardener. See, there's a point here. It starts in a garden, and then Jesus is resurrected in a garden. And then in the last book and last chapter of the Bible, in Revelation 22, when heaven and earth come together, the restoration of all things is filled with garden imagery. The holy city is around the river of life, and the fruit-bearing trees of the abundance of the tree of life are all around. So you go from the beginning in the book of Genesis chapter 2, this garden imagery, to the very end, garden imagery again. All I'm trying to do is say to you, the Bible is full of this garden imagery, and I think it should land right here in our church, and we should see ourselves in this garden way. And that's why we're talking about ecosystem. So I want to show you the next picture. This next picture is kind of how a garden ecosystem works. And with this, I'm going to close, and we're going to finish this next week. So there's 7 layers that I want to unpack next week in part 2 of what happens within a garden ecosystem. And so in a garden ecosystem, the invisible layer is called the bioactivity. And that's what's happening in the invisible realm that you can't chart the layers happening, but there's 5 other layers that you can actually physically see. The bedrock, the soil, the surface, and the green, and then the air. And these all work together in this ecosystem, and throughout these 5 layers, this layer of bioactivity is helping all throughout these, and this is how your garden sustains itself and becomes a flourishing space. And the only one that's missing from there is the idea that that garden is in a particular place. So that's the 7th layer. So the 7 pieces of this garden are, it's in a particular place, there's this bioactivity happening, this energy, this life source that is happening throughout the garden. And then you have these 5 layers in which this is all happening, where this decomposition and this nutrient kind of dense thing is happening and moving up into the plant life. And then the air is putting things in and moving down. And so there's this cycle of beautiful, nourishing, flourishing taking place. And the same thing that happens in a garden, I'm going to suggest, needs to happen in a local church. That's where this is all going. Surprise. So next week, we are going to look at how these relate to First Baptist Church of Pittsfield. And so I want to encourage you this week, as you're out gardening, as many of you will be, because it's beautiful, and so many gardeners here, you will be out in the dirt, in the soil. You will be watering, you'll be pulling weeds. And as you're doing this, I want you to think about the relationship that your life and the life of this church has to this gardening activity that you apparently find much joy in. In fact, I'll close with this. There's an individual writer, pastor named Jeff Chu. He wrote a book called Good Soil. We might do this for a book club at some point. The subtitle is The Education of an Accidental Farmhand. He's also a gay pastor who is a lovely person and a follower of Jesus. And he was in seminary, and he noticed on the little seminary docket there was a class that was a farming class. He's in seminary. And so he's like, that sounds fun, because it doesn't sound like work, It's a farming class in seminary. Surely you don't have to write papers and all that kind of stuff. So you had to apply for it, though. So he applied to get into this farming seminary class. And he gets in there, and he it's kind of funny because he's kind of more of a preppy, he wears these expensive shoes and cool shorts, and he goes to, farm seminary, and the first thing to do is take him out to the compost pile, and he's just like, I'm going to ruin my shoes, But what he discovered, this whole book is basically him discovering who he is, his heart, his relationship with God, his relationship to the world, as he is getting dirty in the soil of the farm. And as he begins to see the correlations of the produce and fruit bearing and farming and the practices of farming as it relates to his own life, he begins to make the correlation, and it's like he has an awakening of his own heart before God, his relationship with Jesus, his relationship with his family, his relationship with his church, his relationship with others. And this all comes as he is in the middle of the garden. And this is what I want for us. I want us to kind of come to some aha moments about who we are as a church before God, with each other, and with this city as we get our hands dirty in the soil that is the garden, the ecosystem that is this church. So that's what I'm going to pray, and then next week we're going to do it. Okay? I mean, I'm not going to actually take you out and do it. We could. That'd be interesting. Maybe we'll think about that. No, we won't do that. But we will pray that God will help us to find that place as we think about this concept. So would you pray with me? And then as I'm praying, I invite the worship team to come up and